We are in Hebrews chapter 11. If you want to follow along, there's something that looks like this in the bulletin. It just helps you follow along, take notes if you'd like. My prayer this morning, we're talking from Hebrews 11 about faith. My prayer this morning is that wherever you are on your faith journey, that you would find courage. As the song we just sang said, the courage to just lift your hands again and trust. About a month ago, one of the rhythms that I have is to go for a walk or a jog in the morning. I won't say that I go running because nobody would confuse what I'm doing with running. But I'm out there and I'm moving. And the place that I do that is at the track at the high school. Sometimes when I go, there's kids there, teams there practicing. Other times, just a couple of people. Sometimes it's just me and Ellen, or sometimes just me. Well, on this particular day, I believe it was a Saturday, I got there and it didn't seem like anybody was there, but when I looked across the track, I saw these three guys, older guys. You're going, what does older mean? Well, I'm talking like significantly older than me, so old. And I was intrigued because they were doing this stuff like they were preparing for the Olympics. I mean, they're over there doing all these stretches and getting down. And then the one guy holds up this thing that looks like a stopwatch, and he goes, "On your marks, get set." And these guys are down and, whatever they do, they get down in their hands and go! And they take off. And I'm expecting to see like this bolt. These guys are slower than me. So I'm intrigued, like, what happened to these guys? Like, what are they doing? So I started my first lap, and I get over to that point, and the guy that's standing there with the stopwatch, I greeted him, and he says, "It's probably hard being out here with world-class athletes." I did just what you just did. I wasn't really thinking, and I just started to laugh. It just hit my funny bone. And he says, "Why are you laughing?" I'm not. I'm just running. Don't even pay any attention to me. For the rest of my run, I was thinking about those words. Two thoughts. Maybe the guy wasn't lying. One of the joys for me this summer running has been that often I run into Joe Backus. If you know Joe, he's part of our church family. He runs really fast. So he'll often greet me when we get there. And one day I was watching him start, and I thought, I bet I can keep up with him. So he started, and he got a few steps out, and I started. Got to the first turn, and I looked up, and he was like gone. That impresses me, but it doesn't really inspire me. Because even when I was Joe's age, I couldn't run that fast. So there's nothing that helps me looking at him going, hey, if I just try a little harder, maybe I can get there. I can't. But these old guys, that was inspiring. As fate would have it, yesterday, Ellen and I went to walk. I haven't seen the guy since. I'd never seen him before that. We got there yesterday, and there he is with the stopwatch and his team, and they're out there doing their sprints. So we greeted him, and then Ellen said, "Can I just ask you, why you're doing this? It's not like the fans are out here by the thousand watching you guys." So the younger guy says, he points at the older guy, and he says, "The reason I'm doing this is because of him." Because he believes when you get older, you don't have to get stiffer, and you just keep going. Faith is like that. Often when we think about faith, we think about what we call the heroes of the faith and these great exploits of faith. But I think when we get to heaven, we're going to be surprised at all the people of profound faith, but they didn't look like what we thought they would look like. Well, we've been going through Hebrews chapter 11, and there's some people of heroic faith. We think of the likes of Abraham and Moses and David and Peter and Mary, and they were people of heroic faith. We get to verse 31. It's not somebody that you would have ever put in the faith list. If you remember when my kids were young, watch Sesame Street, and there was this thing they did on Sesame Street, and they show you these images, and they go, which one doesn't fit? And you got an elephant, and a giraffe, and a hippopotamus, and an ice cream cone. Which one doesn't fit? Well, that's what this list looks like. Moses. He put his foot in the Red Sea, and the sea parted. And David was just a kid, and he stood up to a giant. And Peter walked on water. And then Rahab, the prostitute. Which picture doesn't go with the other one? Well, apparently in God's mind, they all fit beautifully together, because he doesn't look at it like we do. By faith, it says Rahab. Sometimes when we add an adjective to faith, it can lose its meaning. When we talk about heroic faith, these people did really heroic things, but actually it was God. Moses didn't part the Red Sea. God did. He just put his foot in it. Peter, he did walk on water, but it only worked as long as he was locked into Jesus, who was actually holding him up on the water. And when he stopped looking, down he went. So the idea of heroic faith may be a false notion, because it's really just God. And heroic faith is people who just believed enough to trust what he said. And Rahab was one of those people. All the people in the list are broken people who simply believed and trusted God. But every once in a while, you find faith in a really unlikely place. So let me read verse 31 for you. It says this: it was by faith that the prostitute Rahab, and then it tells her story. Here's the story. We talked a few weeks ago about Abraham. Abraham was a man who had a covenant with God. God came to him and he promised him three things. He said, I'm going to give you this land. I want you to take your family and I want you to move. He wasn't talking about moving from, when we first moved here, we weren't from Ohio. So I remember the first thing we went to at Olmsted High School. And we're sitting across the table from these parents. We introduced ourselves. They said, are you guys from here? Oh, no. Really, where are you from? Oh, we moved from Berea. Wow, that must have been traumatizing. I mean, that's huge. No, this wasn't like moving across. This is a 500-mile move. Abraham moved with his family. And God promised him a son, and 90 years old, and he believed. And then came Isaac and Jacob, and a few weeks ago we looked at the story of Joseph. Joseph gets sold into slavery, but he goes to Egypt, and it's actually in Egypt that God keeps his promise, because when they went to Egypt, there was only 70 of them. God had promised they were going to become this numbered group of people, this nation, and in Egypt it happened. Like it went from 75 and 400 years to about 2 million, 1 million to 2 million people. It was huge. But they weren't in the land that God promised, and now they got to get back there. So God sends a man, Moses, and Moses, Josiah talked about this last week, he leads his people out of slavery through the Red Sea, through the desert, and now they're standing on the verge of the promised land. 440 years later, now they're going in. This is a problem. There's a bunch of people living there. So God tells Joshua, go in and take the land. So one of the most difficult places was a place called Jericho. It was surrounded by impenetrable walls. I mean, walls that are so thick you can ride a bike on them, ride a horse on them. And so he sends spies. Let me read it to you. This comes from Joshua chapter 2. That's where the story is found. Joshua, who had taken the place of Noah, he was the son of Nun, and this is what it says. Joshua, the son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Don't look at me that way. I'm just reading you what it says here. That's how it... I worked all week to try to pronounce it differently, but that's what it says. So that's where these guys are from. And Off they go. Go look over the land, Joshua said, especially Jericho. So they went and they entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab, and they stayed there. Sometimes you find faith in really unlikely places. And when you do, it reveals what I call the scandalous grace of God. So often when we look at the world, we look and we see there's two groups of people. There's good guys and there's bad guys. There's people who are good and there's people who are bad. Who are the bad guys? Well, they swear a lot, they cheat on their taxes, they beat people up, they abuse drugs or alcohol. They're not very religious, they don't go to church, they're just bad guys. But then there's the good guys. Who are they? Well, they're more religious, they keep the rules, they go to bed early so they can get up at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning and pray and come to the second service. They're just good folk. Strangely, most of us perceive ourselves as the good guys. But God doesn't look at it like that. Who are the good guys? Well, the Christians, they're the good people. Well, actually, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Because if you look real close, there's some really bad people who do really good things. And there's some really good people who do really bad things. If you've read Les Miserables or you've seen the play, the beginning, there's a woman who's kind of central in the story. Her name is Fantine. She works in a factory. Her husband abandoned her, and so she's alone trying to take care of her kid. And so she gets a job in a factory, and she takes some money, and she sends it to the people who are taking care of her kid. It's a difficult place, but that's where she lives. Well, the boss in the factory tries to make advances towards her, and because she refuses, he gets angry and accuses her of stuff that she didn't do, and she loses her job. Now she's out on the street. She has no way to take care of her kid, and she tries this and tries that, and she can't, and so ends up having to sell her body so she can provide for her child. It's just really sad. But there's this poignant song where all the ladies of the street are standing there singing, and all the men are coming. There's poor guys, and there's rich guys, and there's politicians, and there's good guys. Turns out you can't tell who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. That's what this story is like. Doesn't work in the story of Rahab. Rahab was a bad guy. She was a prostitute. The spies, they were good guys. They were sent on a mission for God. Well, guess where they went? They went to the house of a prostitute. Now, you can try to make this look really nice and go, oh, it was accidental? How'd they end up there? Amazing. No. The guy who wrote the narrative put that in there. If they got there by accident, that's not how he would have written it. He would have said, they went to Rahab's house. Why did they go to Rahab's house? Rahab was a prostitute. That's why they ended up at her house. Jacques Tissot, a French artist, has painted a number of pictures of biblical characters. This one is an image of Rahab. She was a prostitute. That's why they went to her house. So you're going, so who's the good guy and who's the bad guy? Well, God doesn't actually look at it like that. But what you do see in the story is Rahab, the prostitute, responds in faith to God. And what does God do? He embraces her. That's what grace looks like. That's the only way that any of us can get to God, is by grace. It's the same for everyone. C.S. Lewis tells a story. There was a British conference on comparative religions. There's a whole bunch of experts from around the world came to the university where he taught to debate, and they were debating about, is there any belief that if you look at the Christian faith, it's unique to the Christian faith? So they're talking about all kinds of things, is it the incarnation? Well, actually, though the incarnation in Christianity is that God came in Christ, and that's a historical fact that actually happened. If you look at other religions, they have stories like that in there. Resurrection. Jesus historically, physically rose from the dead. He's alive. But there are other religions that also talk about stories like that. So they're debating this, going back and forth. C.S. Lewis walks into the room and says it in the eloquent way he does. What's the rumpus about? I said, well, we're having a discussion here. Our discussion is about Christianity's unique contribution to the world. Lewis responded, well, you're wasting your time. It's obvious. It's grace. It is grace. It doesn't exist anywhere else. It was given to us by God through Christ, grace. Rahab somehow got it. Grace is God's unmerited love and favor that he extends to us as forgiveness by pure grace. If you study most of the religions of the world, you can see them as though they're a ladder. Here's a ladder. If you want to get to God, this is how you do it. You do this, and then you pray here, and then you do this, and then you give that. And if you do well enough, you might get there. Jesus says, actually, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do to be good enough. But I can forgive you and give you my righteousness. That's by grace. There's nobody that's ever received that because they deserved it. They only receive it because God is gracious. Grace is so radically different, and it actually, when you believe it, it upsets the whole system that we live by. What will it mean if we are people of scandalous grace? What would happen if our church was a picture of that kind of grace? I'll just tell you, it's messy. Grace is not clean. It's messy because it opens the door to messy people. Does that mean that the law is not important? No. Does it mean that we shouldn't be striving to live like Jesus, to live right? No. But the only way to get there is through grace. Grace opens the door to goodness. Goodness never opens the door to grace. If you try to get to grace by being good, you just get grumpy and judgmental. But if you get to goodness by walking through the door of grace, you get changed. When we think of ourselves as the good guys, we forget how needy we are. So at the end of the story, really life is divided into two groups. But it's not good guys and bad guys. It's people who are really messed up and admit it, and people who are really messed up and don't. Rahab looked at the picture, and she perceived God, and she acted in faith. Here's the second idea. The unlikely faith that you see in this story screams out to us that to have faith, you don't need a pedigree. You just have to believe. You don't have to come from this family or have this degree. All you gotta do is believe. This is what it says. In the story, these two spies get sent by Joshua and they end up at Rahab's house. So, somebody comes to the door from Jericho, says, hey, there's two Hebrews. We saw them go into your house. Oh, yeah. Yeah, they stopped by, but they left, and I don't know where they went. Actually, she was hiding them on the roof. So they went to find the two spies. She goes up on the roof, and this is what she says. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof, and she said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came from Egypt, and what he did to Sihon and to Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord, your God, is God in heaven above, and he's God on earth below. What an amazing statement of faith. Your God is the God in heaven. He's the God on earth. He is God. How did she know that? She just heard about it. She'd never actually seen it. Sometimes confessions of faith come from really unlikely places. Sometimes they come from prostitutes and foreigners and people who didn't have all the things that the spies had, but the little they had, they embraced it. Somehow Rahab saw the picture and makes this declaration. It's beautiful. The Lord your God is the God in heaven and the God on earth. Where she grew up, none of those stories had been heard. Doesn't matter where you come from, doesn't matter what your parents believe, doesn't matter how messed up you've gotten. All he asks is that you believe, that you trust that Jesus is the one that God sent. Rahab saw it and embraced it. The last church that Ellen and I had the privilege of being part of was in Senegal, and there was lots of languages, lots of different ethnic groups, people from really different religious backgrounds. There was Christians, there was Buddhists, there was Muslims, there was all coming to worship together and listen to the gospel on Sunday morning. A young guy was coming to the church, and he stopped me one day after church, and he said, "Can I just talk to you sometime?" I said, "I'd love to." So he sat down, and he said, "You know what? The Jesus thing makes sense to me, but the whole Christian thing I'm not getting." I said, "Well, explain that to me." He said, "Well, no offense, you're a pastor, but sometimes Christians act weird." I said, "Tell me about it. I got to live with them." Just kidding. I said, "Yeah, sometimes they do." So he said, "I don't know if I could be a Christian, but I think I could follow Jesus." I said, "Well, you just follow him. He'll show you the rest. Don't worry about that." Sometimes our faith gets all mixed up with the stuff. And we think that to believe, to receive grace, all you got to do is come and receive it. Here's the third picture in there. Unlikely faith actually turns people from mercenaries to mercy. Throughout the Old Testament, you see the word chesed. It talks about the unfailing love of God, the loving kindness of God. What does that kind of love look like? It's when somebody returns kindness for unkindness. Well, guess who does it in this story? It's not the spies, it's the prostitute. She understands who God is, and she acts, and she saves the lives of these two men, and then requests of them that they have mercy on her, but she's the first one that showed mercy. Isn't that beautiful? She got it. She believed, and her faith opened the door. When you walk into the door of grace, it changes you. The ones that, they didn't come there to bless Rahab. They got blessed by Rahab. Beautiful picture. Here's the last picture in the story. The story ends with a really unlikely sign of faith. This is what happened. She talks to these men, and then she says, "I'm going to let you down so that you can get out of here." There's a scarlet rope hanging out her window. Her wall of her house, where the window is on the wall of the city. So if you go out the window, you can go down the wall. So she said, you go down the rope and then get out of here under this condition, that when you come back, that you will spare me and my family. So this is what they said. Verse 21. Agreed, she replied. Let it be as you say. So she sends them away, and they departed. And she tied the scarlet cord in the window. This is what they said. We'll save you. We'll save anyone in your house. The only way we're going to know is you hang that scarlet cord out your window, and anybody in that house will be saved. If you don't, if you're not in the house, we can't help you. Hang out the scarlet cord. Some believe that the red cord of Rahab is the precursor to the red light. What does a red light mean? When we talk about the red light district, it's not a good thing. We all know what it means. What did red cord hanging out your window mean? Well, they think that was the indication of who is in the house. So the very thing that is her shame and her pain, they ask her to hang it out the window. I don't think Rahab wanted to be a prostitute. I'm not sure that anybody does. I don't think many girls, when they're 7 years old, you ask them, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's not on anybody's list. That's where Rahab landed. Story I was telling you earlier from Les Miserables. Fantine sings this song that's just haunting. She's talking about the life that she's landed in now. And she says, come on, Captain. Come on in, you can wear your shoes. Must make it feel cheap to have a girl who can't refuse. Easy money lying in a bed. Just as well they never see the hate that's in your head. Don't they know they're making love to somebody who's already dead? That's where Rahab lived. These men said, we will save you and your family. All we ask is that you hang a red cord out the window. Get everyone you love under your roof, and then hang out the window the very symbol of your shame. Her source of shame became the very thing that saved her. And you know what? That's true for every one of us. It's when we'll own up to our junk, this is it, that we receive grace. The ultimate symbol of shame in the Roman world was a cross. The very thing that Jesus accepted is the very thing that erases our shame. I don't know what shame you might be carrying this morning. Lots of things that cause us shame, stuff we don't want anybody to know about. Things that we did, things that we said. Nobody knows. They asked Rahab to take a scarlet cord and hang it out the window. Everybody knew. But it was that very thing that opened the door in her life to God's grace. Beautiful. The cross is the ultimate symbol of shame. The ultimate symbol of shame is the thing that covers ours. There are no good guys and bad guys. There's just lots of people who need the grace of God. And the ones who have enough sense to say, I need it, he extends it. We're going to close this morning around this table. It is a reminder that the forgiveness and the grace that we have received came at a really high price. That's how great is the love of God for us. I'm going to pray for us, then I'm going to invite the team to come. and we will close our time together around this table. Father, thank you for this reminder. None of us has grace in our default system. It can only be learned at your feet. And it can only be received when we have courage enough to hang the red cord out and admit our need for you. Some of us spend our whole life trying to prove that we're a good guy. And you're just longing for us to come to you and let you be enough. So as we gather around this table, Holy Spirit, we invite you to be here with us. In Jesus' name, amen.